The night was supposed to be uneventful. A simple rest stop, a quick break from the long drive. But for Marcus Grant, everything was about to change. As he stepped out of his car, Marcus had no idea that this stop would be the beginning of a nightmare that would turn his life upside down. 2 officers, a dark secret, and a twist of fate would leave him fighting not just for his freedom, but for justice itself. Stick around to witness the shocking twist that no one saw coming. Where in the world are you watching from? Let me know in the comments below. And don't forget to hit that like button and subscribe for more stories like this. Trust me, you won't want to miss what happens next. It was a late summer evening when Marcus Grant, a 32-year-old software engineer, found himself pulling into the rest stop off Highway 42. The drive had been long, and the need for a quick break was urgent. His eyes, tired from the road, scanned the rest stop for a spot to park. A small oasis of light in the midst of the darkness. As Marcus stepped out of his black sedan, the cool breeze of the evening greeted him, and he stretched his stiff limbs. The parking lot was mostly empty, with a few other cars parked at various angles, a mix of travelers hoping for a short break. The fluorescent lights flickered above, buzzing lightly in the quiet night. He made his way to the restroom, keeping his head low as he walked across the asphalt. It wasn't the first time he had stopped here, and he knew the layout by heart. As he passed a row of trucks, he noticed 2 police cruisers parked at the far end. The officers stood near the front of their vehicles, chatting as they kept an eye on the lot. Marcus didn't think much of it. The world had become far too used to the presence of law enforcement, and in his own mind, he was simply another traveler stopping for a quick pit stop. He didn't notice the officer's eyes following him until it was too late. Just as Marcus reached the door to the restroom, a harsh voice called out from behind him. "Hey! You there! Stop!" Marcus froze, instinctively looking over his shoulder to see 2 officers striding toward him. They wore the stern faces of men who had dealt with too many unruly individuals in the past. Their heavy boots thudded on the ground as they approached, their hands resting casually on their holsters. "Can I help you, officers?" Marcus asked, keeping his voice calm but steady. He wasn't the type to make waves. He had learned long ago that in situations like this, the best course of action was to remain polite and cooperative. One of the officers, a burly man in his mid-40s with a scar running across his jaw, sneered at him. "You fit the description of someone who's been causing trouble around here. We've had reports of a suspicious vehicle. Mind telling us why you're parked all the way out here alone?" Marcus, taken aback by the accusation, raised his hands slightly in a gesture of harmlessness. "I'm just stopping for a break. Long drive, you know." The other officer, a younger man with slicked back hair and a tight jawline, crossed his earns. "Yeah, we've heard that one before." He narrowed his eyes, clearly sizing Marcus up. "What's in the trunk?" Before Marcus could respond, the older officer stepped forward, his voice gruff. "You're coming with us, son. Step over here." "Wait, what? I haven't done anything wrong," Marcus protested, his heart beginning to race. The weight of their accusation sank in, the familiar knot of anxiety twisting in his stomach. He wasn't about to get dragged into something that wasn't his fault. The younger officer stepped forward, his expression cold. "You want to make this harder for yourself?" Marcus knew the drill. He had been a black man in America long enough to understand that certain situations could escalate quickly, especially with the wrong set of eyes watching. He knew better than to argue too much, so he took a cautious step back, his hands slowly rising to show that he wasn't carrying anything dangerous. "I'm not resisting, okay? I'm just trying to get some rest," Marcus said, his voice steady but with a touch of frustration. He didn't want to go through this. Not here, not now. The older officer shoved him hard against the hood of one of the police cruisers. "Shut up and get in the car. You're under suspicion now." Marcus's mind raced. He couldn't believe this was happening. His thoughts flashed back to all the instances in the news, all the stories of black men who were treated like criminals for no reason. This wasn't just a bad encounter. It felt like something worse was on the horizon. "Let me go," Marcus said, his voice growing louder, but the officers paid him no mind. The younger officer grabbed his arm, pulling him roughly toward the car. "Get in, now." Marcus's heart pounded in his chest, his body stiff, his muscles tensed, ready to fight back if it came to that. But his mind screamed at him to stay calm. He couldn't afford to be another headline in a long list of tragic stories. "You're making a mistake," Marcus said, more to himself than to them. He was about to argue further when he felt the cold metal of the officer's handcuffs snap around his wrists. The officers weren't listening. They were too eager to make their point, too ready to flex their authority. They pushed Marcus into the back of the cruiser, slamming the door shut behind him with an audible thud. The lights from the cruisers reflected off the glass of the rest stop, casting an eerie glow over the scene. The whole lot was quiet except for the hum of the police light. Marcus sat there in the back seat, his mind whirling. He couldn't afford to lose his cool. He couldn't afford to get arrested over something that was never his fault. Then, as if fate had chosen this moment for him, he overheard something in the officers' conversation. They were talking about something else, something that made his blood run cold. "I don't care what the paperwork says," the older officer said, his voice low but full of intent. "We've got to get him out of here fast. If anyone catches wind of this, we're done." Marcus's ears perked up. Was he hearing this right? What did they mean by "get him out of here"? What was going on? He needed to know more. He leaned forward, trying to listen more closely. Whatever was happening here, it was bigger than just a random stop. There was something darker, something sinister in the air. And in that moment, Marcus made a decision. He wouldn't just let this go. No, he wasn't going to be another man wronged by the system. He was going to make sure they paid for what they had done. They didn't know who they were dealing with. Marcus sat in the back of the police cruiser, his heart racing as the two officers continued their conversation just outside. They seemed distracted, too caught up in whatever plan they had to notice him listening intently to every word. It was like a slow-burning fuse in his mind, the unease growing into something sharper, something he couldn't ignore. "Did you hear about the new guy coming to the city?" the younger officer asked. His voice was quieter now, a contrast to his earlier bravado. "Yeah, the one they're bringing in from upstate? The big wig?" The older officer's tone was filled with distaste. "What does he want with us? We've got enough heat as it is. And now we have some rich asshole breathing down our necks." "Doesn't matter," the younger officer replied. "We get the job done, then we can all go home. Make sure nobody finds out about the little incident tonight, and we're good to go. You've got your alibi ready?" Marcus's head swirled with confusion and suspicion. What were they talking about? What incident? His mind couldn't piece it together, but the sense of dread deepened. His thoughts were interrupted when the older officer spoke again, louder this time. "Let's move him out. We can deal with him later, but we need to make sure no one else sees him. If he starts talking, it'll be our word against his, and we don't need any more witnesses. We'll get him out of here fast, and the rest of this town won't know a thing." The words hit Marcus like a punch to the stomach. It wasn't just about him being in the wrong place at the wrong time. No, this was part of something larger, something dangerous. He wasn't sure exactly what they were planning, but it was clear now that this wasn't just a routine arrest. They had something to hide. Marcus strained against his restraints, his wrists aching from the cuffs. Every instinct in his body told him to act, to move. But he knew that making the wrong move now could get him in even more trouble. He needed a plan. He needed to think, but more than that, he needed to survive this. The younger officer opened the door and slid into the driver's seat. "You sure about this?" he asked, glancing over his shoulder. "Positive. He's not going anywhere. He'll be out of the picture before the night's over. Just keep it smooth, and we'll be fine." As the engine roared to life, Marcus's eyes darted to the rearview mirror. The flashing red and blue lights bathed the streets, but the rest of the lot was dark and empty. He knew he had limited time before they moved him somewhere he might never come back from. He needed to act, but how? Marcus leaned back in his seat, trying to calm his breathing. His mind was racing. He wasn't going to sit here quietly waiting for whatever fate they had planned for him. No, he would not let this moment slip away without a fight. He thought back to the words they had said. The new guy, get him out of here. They didn't know it, but they were playing into Marcus's hands. He'd been a hacker before, back when he worked freelance. He knew how to get in, get out, and cover his tracks. He wasn't the helpless man they thought he was. They had no idea who they were dealing with. But first he needed a way to get these cuffs off. The young officer in the front kept glancing over his shoulder, unaware of Marcus's growing resolve. Marcus stayed still, his mind focusing on the one thing he could do right now, getting free. He'd been trained to think fast, and he wasn't about to let this moment slip away. Marcus's pulse quickened as the car sped down the highway, the tires humming on the dark asphalt. The officers up front were too distracted with their conversation, their voices low and muffled by the hum of the engine. The lights from the cruisers in the rearview mirror cast flickering shadows on the walls of the car. He couldn't sit still any longer. The cuffs were uncomfortable, biting into his skin. The longer he stayed like this, the more likely it was that they'd take him somewhere remote, somewhere he wouldn't be able to fight back. He couldn't let that happen. He needed a plan, and he needed it fast. Marcus shifted in his seat, trying to test the cuffs. They were tight, no doubt about that, but not unbreakable. There was a slight wiggle room around his left wrist, just enough to get a finger under the metal. It wasn't much, but it was a start. The young officer, still oblivious to Marcus's growing plan, adjusted the radio. "What if we take him to the old warehouse?" he asked, the casual tone of the question sending a chill down Marcus's spine. "Not yet," the older officer replied, his voice sharp. "Let's get him to the station first. We can figure out the rest when we're alone with him. No one's going to be able to stop us by then." Marcus's thoughts raced as he listened to their words. The station, that meant they were taking him somewhere he could get locked away and forgotten about. A place where he could disappear forever. It didn't matter if they were taking him to the station or some remote warehouse. They couldn't just let him walk away from this. The next part of Marcus's plan was risky, but he was out of options. He had to act now before they realized what he was up to. In the corner of his eye, he spotted the police radio hanging from the dashboard. It was in arm's reach, just within his line of sight. His mind quickly processed the situation. If he could get to the radio, maybe he could use it to send out a distress call. It wasn't ideal, but it was a start. He tested the cuffs again, the metal scraping against his wrist. He had just enough slack to wiggle his hand toward the radio, but he would have to be quick. Marcus slowly inched his body toward the dashboard, his arms slipping around behind him, trying to inch his way closer to the device. Every movement had to be subtle, every breath controlled. "What's the weather look like tomorrow?" the young officer asked casually, clearly trying to make small talk, oblivious to the danger that was brewing in the back seat. "It's gonna be hot, just like tonight," the older officer responded, his voice rough. "You sure you want to go through with this? Couldn't we just drop him off at the precinct?" "No way," the younger officer insisted. "He's already seen too much. He's not getting off easy." Marcus's heart skipped a beat as he finally grasped the radio. He had it. Now all he had to do was figure out how to use it. He pulled his hand back, bringing the radio closer to his chest. His fingers fumbled over the buttons, trying to find the one that would broadcast a signal. He didn't know much about police radios, but he knew enough to trigger the emergency frequency. If he could send out a distress signal, someone might be able to pick it up. Someone who would help him. The younger officer turned around again, his eyes narrowing suspiciously. "What are you doing back there?" he asked, his tone suddenly colder, more aware. Marcus froze. He had seconds before the officer would realize what was happening. Without a second to spare, he pressed the button on the radio. A loud crackling noise filled the car, followed by a burst of static. The young officer's eyes widened, and he immediately spun in his seat, his hand reaching for his holster. "What the hell?" The older officer's voice rose with alarm. "What's going on back there?" Marcus didn't wait for a response. He grabbed the radio again, trying to press down the button. This time he made sure to hold it longer. The static was still there, but the signal wasn't strong enough to get through. "Shit," Marcus muttered under his breath. He had to think fast. The officers were realizing what he was doing. In a panic, Marcus slammed his body forward, causing the seatbelt to snap tight against his chest. His heart pounded, but he didn't. He twisted his body in a desperate attempt to break free from the cuffs, using the seatbelt as leverage to push his body forward. The car swerved slightly, the tires screeching against the road. The young officer cursed under his breath, glancing nervously at the older officer. "What's going on?" he asked, but his partner was already shouting for him to pull over. Marcus's mind was a whirlwind of thoughts. The radio had failed, and now the officers were on high alert. He had only one move left. It was a long shot, but it might just work. "Pull over now," the older officer yelled, his voice strained with anger. Without thinking, Marcus slammed his foot against the floor, pushing against the back seat with all his might. He kicked out with both feet, hitting the partition between the back and front seats. The glass shuddered, but it didn't break. Frustrated, Marcus shifted again, trying to leverage his body to break the cuffs free. Sweat dripped from his brow, and the strain in his body was unbearable. Finally, as the officers began to realize the severity of the situation, Marcus pushed harder against the seat, ready to fight his way free. The police car veered slightly off course, as Marcus's efforts to break free gained momentum. The tires screeched against the road, causing the vehicle to wobble. The older officer, who had been trying to stay calm until now, finally lost it. He slammed his fist on the dashboard, cursing under his breath. "What the hell, man? We've got to get this under control," he yelled, his face reddening as he gripped the steering wheel tighter. The younger officer fumbled for his radio, his hands shaking as he tried to assess the situation. "We need backup. Now, he's out of control." But Marcus wasn't backing down. He had reached a point where there was no turning back. His chest heaved as he pulled against the cuffs, desperately twisting his body in every direction, determined to get free. His mind raced through all the possible scenarios, weighing the risks of each move. The time for caution was over. The younger officer shouted at his partner to pull over, but the older officer only pressed harder on the gas, pushing the car faster down the dark highway. It wasn't a calm situation anymore. It was a race against time. Marcus could feel the panic rising in his chest, but it fueled his determination. The way they had spoken, how they'd casually mentioned getting rid of him, how they'd referred to him as nothing more than a nuisance to be disposed of, ignited something deep inside him. He wasn't just fighting for his freedom now. He was fighting for his life. With a sudden surge of strength, Marcus twisted his body one last time. The cuffs, which had been cutting into his skin, finally gave way. He could feel the pressure release around his wrist as he wrenched his hand free. His heart raced as he yanked the metal off his arm, the sharp pain subsiding into adrenaline-fueled relief. "Got it," Marcus whispered to himself. Now, he needed to act fast. He took one swift breath and slammed his hand against the door handle, throwing his weight against the door. It swung open with a loud creak, and the wind rushed in, throwing his hair back as the car's speed intensified. The officers had noticed by now, but it was too late. Marcus was already half out of the vehicle, one foot on the asphalt, one arm gripping the door as he fought for balance. "Stop! Get back in!" The older officer shouted, his voice full of panic. He made a sharp turn of the wheel, trying to keep Marcus inside, but it only made the car swerve even more. The younger officer, now frantic, pulled his gun out, pointing it toward Marcus, his finger hovering over the trigger. "Stay the hell down. I'll shoot." But Marcus was no longer listening. His mind was on one thing: escape. The gun was a threat, but it wasn't going to stop him. He had made it this far, and he wasn't going to be pulled back now. With a surge of desperation, he threw his body the other way, slamming the door shut with all his might. The officers' voices were lost in the rush of wind, as the car swerved again, tires screaming against the road. The younger officer was yelling into his radio, signaling for backup. Marcus, still half in the car, felt the door handle slip from his grip as the officers struggled to regain control of the vehicle. But Marcus wasn't thinking about that. He focused all his energy on getting out. He yanked himself fully free, falling hard onto the pavement. The rough impact jolted through his body, but it didn't stop him. The car behind him slowed slightly, but not enough to stop him from running. Adrenaline surged through his veins as he pushed himself to his feet. He sprinted into the dark, pulling himself further away from the chaos. The officers, caught off guard, struggled to regain control of the situation. Marcus could hear them shouting at each other, cursing as they tried to chase after him. But Marcus had the lead. He knew that for the moment, he had a small window of opportunity. He wasn't going to waste it. The darkness enveloped him as he ran, his breath ragged, and his legs burning from the exertion. The sound of the car screeching to a halt echoed in his ears, but he kept moving, knowing that as long as he could stay out of their reach for just a little longer, he would have a chance. He dove into the shadows of a nearby wooded area, pushing himself deeper into the thick brush. The officer's headlights swept across the road, illuminating the trees in the darkness where he had just been. They were close, but not close enough. Marcus's mind raced, calculating his next move. He had to get to a place where he could find help, or at the very least, escape further into the night. The rest stop was behind him now, and with the car gone, he had a brief window to slip away unnoticed. He darted from tree to tree, moving with purpose, staying low to avoid being seen. He couldn't risk leading them back to a place where they could capture him again. Every step felt like it was pushing him further into unknown territory, but he couldn't stop. He wouldn't stop. Behind him, The sound of the officers shouting became more distant, and the headlights of the police cars vanished into the horizon. For now, Marcus was free, but the hardest part was still to come. Marcus slowed his pace as he reached the edge of the woods, his breath coming in sharp, ragged gasps. The night was thick around him, the shadows swallowing him whole, but for the first time since the officers had grabbed him at the rest stop, he felt a flicker of hope. He was still alive, he'd escaped. But as the adrenaline began to fade, Marcus's mind shifted. The fight wasn't over yet. He had made it this far, but that didn't mean he was free. The officers would be coming for him. They'd already shown how far they were willing to go, and Marcus wasn't about to let that slide. He wasn't just going to survive. He was going to make sure they paid for what they had done. The sound of sirens in the distance brought him back to reality. He knew he couldn't afford to stay in one place too long. His mind began to calculate his next move. Suddenly his phone buzzed in his pocket. He had no idea who could be calling at this hour, but the name on the screen gave him a moment of clarity. It was Marcus's old colleague, Tim, from his freelance hacking day. Tim had been a part of the same underground network that Marcus had worked with, an encrypted group of individuals who specialized in exposing corruption, no matter where it lurked. Tim had connections to the kind of people who could make things disappear, who could help Marcus disappear. Marcus answered the phone, his voice low but urgent. "Tim, I need help." "Marcus? What the hell happened?" Tim's voice was full of concern, but also a hint of disbelief. "They're corrupt. They were going to kill me, man. I overheard them talking about getting rid of me, and then they tried to arrest me for no reason. I had to run." Marcus's voice was shaking with a mix of rage and fear. Tim paused for a long moment. "Where are you? I'll send someone to meet you. But you have to listen to me, Marcus. We've got one shot at this. If you want to bring them down, you need to play it smart." "I don't care about playing it smart," Marcus said through gritted teeth. "I just want them to pay for what they've done." "I get it. But listen. Right now you're not the one who's in control. The people behind the scenes, the ones pulling the strings, they're the ones who are untouchable. But there's something else. Something bigger going on." Marcus was silent for a moment, his mind trying to make sense of Tim's words. "What do you mean?" Tim's voice grew more serious. "They're not just some rogue cops. They're part of a larger network. They've been operating this way for years. We have to be careful how we expose them." Marcus's mind raced. He had suspected something larger was at play, but hearing it confirmed felt like a punch to the gut. "What are you saying?" "I'm saying that this isn't just about you. This is bigger than just a bad arrest. These guys, they've been covering up some serious shit. And the only way to take them down is to expose everything. But you need to be their judge. You need to be the one to call them out publicly." Marcus stood still, his mind working through the implications. What Tim was suggesting wasn't just risky. It was dangerous. But Marcus knew he had no choice. He had no way of going back to a normal life now. He was too deep. "Okay," Marcus said, his voice steely with determination. "What do I have to do?" Tim gave him the details. How to get the evidence, how to contact the right people, and most importantly, how to expose them to the public in a way that would make sure they couldn't hide anymore. Marcus wasn't just going to be a victim. He was going to make sure these officers were held accountable for their actions. Hours later, Marcus stood at a public podium in the center of a packed city square, his hands shaking but his voice steady. He had the evidence. He had the truth. A large screen behind him displayed images of the officers, pictures taken from hidden cameras, recordings from the police cruisers, and files of damning information. The crowd fell silent as Marcus spoke, his words carrying the weight of years of injustice. "I'm not here to tell you my story. I'm here to tell you theirs. The men and women who are supposed to protect us, who are supposed to uphold the law, are the very ones breaking it." Marcus's voice rang out across the crowd. "They've used their power to harm and destroy, to cover up their wrongdoings, and I'm here to make sure they don't get away with it anymore." The crowd erupted in shock and anger as the images flashed on the screen. The officers, those same men who had tried to silence him, were now exposed for everyone to see. Marcus's heart pounded as he finished speaking, his words now being carried by every news station in the city. The weight of what he had just done settled in. He wasn't just a victim. He had become the judge, And now the world knew the truth. He had faced the system. He had fought back. And now he had ensured that justice would prevail. As the police sirens wailed in the distance, this time Marcus didn't feel fear. He felt a sense of justice, a sense of power that he had never known before. The game had changed. He wasn't just surviving anymore. He was making sure the ones who had wronged him would pay.